lot of stuff going on away from the Super Bowl, Dan. Let's start in Buffalo. If I said the Bills are going to trade Stephon Diggs, is that an overreaction?
It's not. I think it's possible that they look into that. I think they need to overhaul things at wide receiver, whether Diggs is back or not in Buffalo. And, you know, there's just been a couple little things here over the last couple of years that make you wonder if it's sustainable long term. Not the easiest move to make. They carry over $30 million in dead money this year if they trade him before June 1st. But it's certainly a possibility. I don't think people would be wise to rule it out.
Okay, then let's stay in the division for the next one here. If I said Tua will sign a huge extension this offseason, is that an overreaction?
I think it is. It's certainly possible that he does sign an extension, but he's got the fifth-year option coming up this year, and I think, you know, that gives them and him some leeway to wait and see how the year goes. It's possible he might want to wait and see if he has a better year than he just had, which he had a very good one. But, yeah, it might be better for both sides to wait this out, give it a year, and see where things stand. You know, it's not going anywhere. They have the franchise tag available to them the year after this if they want. So I think it's possible he signs it, but I think it's an overreaction to assume that he will.
All right, fair enough. And then let's talk about another young quarterback, and that's Justin Fields. If I said Justin Fields is going to wind up being an NFL MVP on a team other than the Bears, is that an overreaction?
No, I think he's got the skill set for it. I mean, we've seen quarterbacks who are dual-threat quarterbacks have a really good chance to win MVP when their teams have success. So if he goes somewhere, lands in a situation where he plays for a playoff team, a contending team, has a big year with his arm and with his legs, he fits that description, he fits that bill, and I think he'll be somebody we talk about in those conversations if he ever ends up in a situation that's better than the one he has spent his first 3 years in.
Well, in which almost anything would be,
that's not
to
hard.
be fair. But the reason this comes up, obviously, for those of you who are just starting to get yourself towards the draft here, is because the top quarterback prospect, the top prospect in this draft by far is Caleb Williams. Everyone has him going number one in their mock draft. And the Bears, of course, are the team that has the number one pick. The Commanders have the second overall pick, and they caused quite the stir when they hired one of Caleb's USC coaches, Cliff Kingsbury, to be their offensive coordinator. Even our own Adam Schefter, who's not one to speculate, tweeted, "Let the speculation begin." Cliff Kingsbury coached Caleb Williams last season. Williams was a standout quarterback at Gonzaga High School in Washington. The Commanders hold the number 2 overall pick. They are in striking distance of the number 1 pick that belongs to Chicago. And Caleb, while maintaining some degree of plausible deniability, did post this congratulations to Kingsbury, and notably Kingsbury not wearing a USC shirt in the picture, but wearing a Washington shirt. In the meantime, Williams' former head coach at USC is Lincoln Riley. He was on with McAfee yesterday saying a lot of teams have reached out to him.
We've talked to quite a few already. I think, you know, people see the talent on the field. I think they're wanting to know about the guy, you know, in the meeting room. They're wanting to know about the guy in the locker room, the type of leader he is. It would be awesome to see him reunite with Cliff, certainly in Washington, but we know there's a lot of things out of control and a lot of things that'll transpire between now and then.
All right, so Lewis, as you and I sort of begin in earnest our preparations for Detroit at the end of April, there are so many pieces to all of this. Let's focus in on the very top of the draft. The Bears have the first pick. The Washington Commanders have the second. All of these signs that seem to be moving Caleb Williams towards number 2, but the Bears will have to play along with that. Give us right now the read on Caleb Williams and the situation he sits in.
Look, I mean, Chicago has a very unique, decision to make. And when you're talking about Washington, you're just hoping that somehow, some way, you can kind of like maintain all of your draft capital. And, actually, there's no way you're going to be able to maintain your draft capital. If you want him, even if Chicago doesn't want him, you're going to have to move to number 1 to assure yourself that you would get him, because someone else will try and come there to get him as well. And I understand why you would try and move for a young man like Caleb Williams, in particular Washington, to assure themselves that they would get him. And that's because, look, the guy truly, from a passing the football perspective, from an off-schedule playmaking perspective, from a running perspective, I watched this young man do some things where you're sitting there and you're going, look, he has some of that kind of pocket presence, foot quickness, arm talent, and then speed that goes above and beyond what Patrick can do. Okay? I'm talking about pure open field running ability and speed. And he has some of the same natural passing characteristics that Patrick has. So if you're sitting there and you're Washington and you have Cliff Kingsbury and Caleb is from the area and he has a great relationship with Cliff already and he's tweeting out and rather he's putting on Instagram, my dog. I mean, come on. Don't overthink some things here. This is, football, we overthink a lot of things with football. Like I said, we twist ourselves up a lot of times trying to get to a conclusion that we know ain't the right conclusion. The right conclusion for Washington is do what you got to do to get this guy on your football team because nobody in your organization, and I mean nobody, knows Caleb like Cliff Kingsbury does. So you don't have to call Lincoln. You don't have to call anybody. Right. Just ask the guy who's now in your building. And if he gives him the stamp of approval, then you move heaven and earth to try and get in position to draft him because you ain't going nowhere with the people you got. Nowhere. Make it happen.
So that becomes an interesting piece of this. There were two trains running on parallel tracks with this, Jeff, and we discussed this yesterday. One of them is Washington's desire to get Caleb Williams, and again, the Bears have to play ball. One of the things that could play into that is if Caleb Williams really wants that. Now, we haven't heard him say that specifically.
We have not.
But there have been things his father has talked about, wanting control of his situation. That was before the draft order was decided. But his relationship with Cliff Kingsbury and everything else. And what Caleb Williams is he is the first generational prospect of the NIL era, Jeff.
Yeah.
He's the first one that we've seen on commercials.
Right.
He's in the Heisman House commercials. He's in the Dr. Pepper commercials. He's doing just fine, even without jumping to the NFL. So he has leverage if he wants to exercise it.
Yeah, if you're Chicago, you make him say no. I mean, if everyone's moving heaven and earth to come get the guy that you're in that spot, and you feel like you need a guy, then you make him tell you no. You don't do, there's no, I'm letting you go flirt with Washington, I'm letting you go do whatever. You are going to be a Bear. And unless we say you're not going, that's what you're going to have to do. And so I think when you're Chicago, you force him to say no to you before you get to this conversation about can he go become, the Washington quarterback with Kingsbury and his coaching staff or whatever it is. You don't care. You don't care what's behind you because you got the lead position.
Well, and Dan, the big social event is about to happen, right? You're going to the Super Bowl, and that'll be fun. But then 2 weeks after that is the Combine.
Yeah.
And that's where this stuff happens.
It is, and that's where it happened last year. That's where the conversations happened that resulted in the Bears trading the 1 pick to Carolina. They had conversations with a lot of different teams there, and that's the deal they came up with that they liked the best. So this is in motion. Look, I mean, Lincoln Riley's saying they're already hearing from teams, right? If the Bears want Caleb Williams, Lincoln Riley probably knows that, right? And so he says it would be great to reunite him with Cliff, but there's other things that have to happen. Like, you talk about moving heaven and earth if you're Washington to get there. It is possible that they can't, right? We go back 4 years ago to the Bengals having the 1 pick and Joe Burrow coming out. And there were teams that were trying to move up, that were offering a lot. Hey, you can get all these extra picks, move back a couple spots, take a quarterback, and also build around him. The Bengals said flatly no to all of it because they felt like Burrow was the guy that was going to change everything for their franchise. And they were right.
Yep.
And if that's the case for Chicago, then they stand pat and they take their guy.
Lewis, go.
The only thing I would say to that, Dan, and I agree with you, bro. I agree with you. The only thing I would say to that, though, is this. In Chicago, right, how can you possibly say in one breath everything surrounding a quarterback helps dictate his future? And I'm not saying you're saying this. I'm just saying overall. How can you say that in one breath and then think that Justin Field has had any shot at all to reach his potential? You know what I mean? And since he wasn't in that situation, they didn't have a Justin Fields sitting there that they actively screwed up.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, they didn't have that dude. And see, that's the only kind of fly in the ointment of what seems like the obvious for many people, which is Chicago, just go ahead and draft Caleb. I mean, they worked actively. They tried real hard to screw up Justin Fields.
Yeah, absolutely.
They really did. And so the worst thing you want if you're Chicago is for him to go somewhere else.
So let me ask you this, because we're going to get into the Justin Fields of it all in a minute. But so there are three things that are happening at the same time. The Bears could stick with Fields, which it doesn't seem like they're inclined to do, but that's one option. They could just take Caleb Williams, which I think is ultimately what's going to happen. The third option is you let Washington have him because you believe that Drake May or Jaden Daniels plus whatever Washington would have to give you, Lewis, maybe it's a #1 pick next year or something else, is worth moving down a spot for. I know the evaluations are just beginning, But is your sense that those other two quarterbacks in this draft are that close to Caleb?
No, absolutely not. And I'll tell you what, Jaden Daniels is a freak show now in terms of his ability to make plays. He is fun. He is fun to watch. And look, there's a reason why he's a Heisman Trophy winner. But Caleb is different. Caleb's different. Look, I think what would separate, like, see, for me, what's going to be interesting here is when eventually we get further down the road and I get more information about what is Jaden like, the person, the student, the teammate in relationship to Drake May. Because as far as Jaden Williams being a playmaker, or Jaden Daniels being a playmaker, and what he can do at the quarterback position compared to Drake May, if I didn't know anything else about them, nothing, it's Jaden Daniels all day long for me. All day. There's a gap from Caleb to Jaden, and then there's a gap to me from Jaden to Drake May. So I'll tell you, this is going to be very, very interesting. But Caleb is definitely, there's a gap, a significant gap.
And that's the key point, right? Because you talk about Justin Fields and maybe he never had a chance in Chicago. He was the fourth quarterback taken in his own draft. Like, we weren't talking about him as a prospect the way that we're talking about Caleb Williams. And if you're Chicago and you think Caleb really is that guy, then I think it becomes an easy decision.